They said Willow Creek Reserve was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. They were wrong. Because the day Elena and I moved into the house at Lot 17, a house 3 feet outside the HOA's imaginary line, was the day a quiet war began. One that wouldn't be fought with weapons or raised voices, but with paperwork, paranoia, and the dangerous illusion of authority. And the woman across the street, Pamela Wright, had no idea who she had just challenged. Nathan Reed never cared much for fences. To him, a home was where the trees whispered, the porch caught the morning light just right, and the air didn't feel regulated. The house they found on the edge of Willow Creek Reserve had all of that in one critical detail that would later change everything. It was not technically under the jurisdiction of the HOA. He didn't think twice when the realtor mentioned it. It's grandfathered, she said, almost in passing, flipping through glossy papers. Built before the HOA lines were finalized in 2091. No dues, no covenants, no voting rights. You get the perks without the politics. That sounded perfect. Especially for Elena. She had fallen in love with the backyard first. Half an acre of quiet green, backed by a row of stubborn oaks that filtered the morning sun. It wasn't much by military standards, but after 2 decades in service, it was the kind of peace she craved. A small patch of earth she could call her own. The house wasn't flashy, 3 bedrooms, brick front, the kind of clean architecture you forget how to describe because it just fits. But it was honest, and that mattered to them both. Nathan remembered the first morning they woke up there. 5 a.m., the soft beep of Elena's watch. The same time she'd always risen, even now, in retirement. She moved through her stretches in the backyard with practiced grace. Push-ups on the flagstone, running drills along the fence, controlled breathing beneath the trees. It was less exercise, more ritual. Like she was grounding herself again. He made coffee. Watched her from the kitchen window, steam rising between them. That was the rhythm for the first few weeks. Peaceful, predictable. Until Pamela Wright introduced herself. She arrived with a smile too polished to trust and a clipboard that felt heavier than it looked. Pamela lived across the street in a powder blue colonial that had 4 flags, 2 American, 1 state, 1 HOA branded. She had lived in Willow Creek for 12 years, chaired the HOA for 9, and ran her committee like a gated fiefdom. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her lipstick the color of a legal warning. "I brought the HOA welcome packet, just light reading. Community guidelines, dues schedule, architectural standards, flag policies, the usual." Nathan blinked. "Thanks. But I think we're outside the HOA?" Pamela's smile never wavered. "Oh, technically, yes. But we like to keep the entire street consistent. Appearance matters. Safety, too." Elena stepped out just then, towel around her neck, sweat still drying from her workout. She nodded politely but didn't offer her hand. Pamela's eyes lingered on her just a little too long. "You're the military one, right?" she asked like it was a diagnosis. Elena's answer was a single word. "Retired." Pamela made a small note on her clipboard. That was the first encounter. Quiet. Uneventful. But something shifted in the air after that. Subtle. Like a glass sliding an inch on a vibrating table. And the real. Nathan noticed the changes first in tone. Neighbors who used to wave now gave brief nods. A subtle hesitance in conversations. An undercurrent of something unspoken. Flyers began appearing in their mailbox. YOA membership strengthens community integrity. Then came the knock on the door from a volunteer compliance coordinator offering to do a free landscaping inspection to help you blend in better. Elena took the flyer, said nothing, and closed the door. Later that evening, Nathan brought it up. "You think this is going somewhere?" Elena was silent for a moment, sitting cross-legged on the floor, polishing a strange wooden box she kept in the corner of the living room. It had no label, no lock, just smooth edges and small brass hinges. "They're testing boundaries," she said. "People like Pamela don't like lines they can't control." Nathan watched her fingers move, slow and methodical. "And what happens if we push back?" Elena didn't look up. "We don't push. We stand." Across the street, Pamela Wright sat in her office, cross-referencing deed maps and zoning codes. The more she looked, the more irritated she became. Lot 17 Reed residence was a loophole, a visual scar on her otherwise immaculate HOA grid. She had built Willow Creek Reserve into one of the top-rated communities in the county, Property values had risen 38% since she took over. She had lobbied for noise ordinances, removed unsightly mailboxes, even organized a drone patrol program for Halloween safety. Control was her currency, and the Reeds were, in her eyes, a threat to that control. Especially Elena. There was something off about the woman. Too quiet, too disciplined. The kind of silence that wasn't passive, but watchful. Pamela didn't like being watched. She preferred to be the one doing the watching. By the end of the first month, Nathan came home to find Elena at the kitchen table, reviewing a letter from the HOA. It wasn't a welcome note. It was a formal request to voluntarily opt into the association, along with a highlighted clause suggesting non-membership may raise community security concerns. Nathan scanned it. They're threatening us? Elena folded the letter carefully, slid it into a folder marked Phase 1, and said only one thing. Let her escalate. By the second month, Nathan had learned to tell what kind of day it would be based on what color blazer Pamela Wright was wearing. Navy blue meant documentation was coming. Tan was for neighborhood diplomacy. And red was war. She wore red on the Tuesday. She walked over with a clipboard thicker than usual and a voice as smooth as conditioned leather. I'm here as a courtesy, she said, standing squarely at the foot of their driveway like a monarch at the edge of foreign land. The board wants to ensure we're being proactive about community alignment. We can't have inconsistency on Willow Lane, not this close to the main gate. Nathan stepped outside, one foot on the porch, the other still inside the doorway. Elena remained in the kitchen, deliberately out of view. Pamela smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We're offering a revised opt-in package. Reduced initiation fee, prorated dues, no retroactive penalties. She tapped the stack of paper. And if your wife has any concerns, we'd be happy to walk her through it. Some veterans find comfort in structure. There it was. The word, veterans. Nathan's spine stiffened. She's doing fine, he said, voice clipped. And we're still outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Pamela's smile didn't move, but her eyes flickered. Technically, but spirit of the law matters too. Integration builds harmony. Harmony builds value. Then she turned and walked back across the street without waiting for a response. Nathan watched her retreat. There was a grace to her walk, controlled and practiced, like she was always aware someone might be watching, and someone was. Elena had been leaning against the counter, arms crossed. When Nathan closed the door, she asked simply, "She mentioned structure, didn't she?" He nodded. Elena said nothing more. That week, the HOA newsletter arrived printed, color-coded, and delivered to every doorstep on the block. On page 2, between community gardening tips and reminders about seasonal wreath guidelines, was a sidebar titled, "The Importance of Uniform Participation." It didn't name names. It didn't have to. The phrase outlier households was repeated 4 times, followed by, failure to integrate can create uncertainty. Let's build strength through unity. Nathan folded the paper carefully and slid it into the same folder Elena had labeled Phase 1. The file was growing. Well, the next wave wasn't official. It came in glances. Neighbors who used to wave now waited to see if Nathan waved first. Some of them crossed the street a little earlier during their morning walks. Others stopped mentioning block barbecues or neighborhood watch meetings. Pamela never directly coordinated the shift. She didn't need to. Her influence moved like wind felt but rarely seen. At night, Nathan stared at the ceiling, wondering if they should have just signed the damn forms. Let it go. Join the HOA, pay the dues, smile for the block photo. But every time he looked at Elena, calm and composed, journaling in silence or tending to her herbs like nothing had changed, he knew they'd made the right decision. This wasn't about $400 annual dues. This was about control. Thursday morning, Pamela escalated. Nathan opened the front door to find a laminated envelope hanging on the mailbox. Notice of landscape nonconformity, bullet points, citations, aerial photos of their lawn from what looked suspiciously like a drone. Alleged violations, non-standard mailbox post height, improper flag placement, U.S. flag not lit after dusk, lack of architectural continuity with adjacent properties. At the bottom, corrective compliance deadline, 14 days. Nathan stood there for a long moment before Elena stepped beside him. She glanced at the letter, then the photos, then up at the sky, which was clean, cloudless, and blue. She's testing reaction time, Elena said. See if we panic, comply, flinch. Nathan exhaled slowly. So what do we do? Elena looked him straight in the eyes. We document, and we wait. What Pamela didn't know or maybe refused to believe was that Elena was responding with the same strategy she'd used in countless deployments. Calculated delay. Let the adversary reveal their tactics. Observe, record, respond with precision. Every letter was scanned, every neighbor interaction cataloged, every HOA newsletter filed, time-stamped, annotated. The living room cabinet now housed a private archive that could have passed for a small intelligence operation. Nathan began to see patterns. Pamela's outreach always followed a familiar sequence. Pressure, isolation, escalation, feigned concern. Her background in legal work had given her just enough language to sound official, but not enough to realize when she'd crossed legal lines. And she had. Multiple times. And one evening, as Nathan reviewed drone-shot photos of their lawn that clearly violated privacy laws, he said aloud, "She's not going to stop." Elena didn't look up from her notes. She thinks silence is weakness, and us not engaging is her losing control. Nathan paused, watching her underline a line of municipal code with military neatness. You're not scared, are you? Elena finally looked up. Her voice was level, but her words were lead. I've seen worse than Pamela Wright. I do. Across the street, Pamela stood in her upstairs study, lights off, blinds cracked just enough to see lot 17. She watched Elena every morning, how she moved, how she trained, how she kept to herself. It unnerved her. There was no rage, no panic, no outbursts. Just routine, exacting, unbreakable. And that kind of calm, Pamela had learned, was the most dangerous kind. That was when she made her next move. If pressure didn't work, she'd change the narrative. The next morning, Nathan received a letter not from the HOA, but from Community Safety and Integration Council, Affiliated Advisory Board. It was unsigned. It accused Elena of increased reclusion, concerning behavior, and unregulated combat-style exercise activity visible to minors. Nathan read the letter 3 times. Then he placed it silently on the kitchen table. Elena didn't flinch. She folded it, slid it into her growing file, and said, "This isn't escalation. This is desperation." And somewhere across the street, behind a veil of closed blinds and control-addicted intentions, Pamela Wright smiled. She thought she had them cornered. She had no idea. Nathan didn't know the exact moment Pamela Wright decided to escalate from petty to dangerous. But it likely happened sometime between her 4th unsuccessful attempt to force them into the HOA and her final realization. Elena Reed couldn't be intimidated. And so, Pamela changed tactics. She stopped targeting their house and started targeting Elena's mind. It began with a meeting Nathan wasn't invited to. A community safety forum held in Pamela's home, attended by a select group of HOA board loyalists and a handful of neighbors who'd grown tired of seeing Elena doing push-ups at sunrise. Pamela framed the conversation carefully. We're not here to judge. We're here to protect. Some veterans struggle with integration. Some carry trauma. Our job is to ensure the safety of all families in Willow Creek. She showed photos, long lens, grainy, taken from behind curtains. Elena training in the backyard. Elena examining her vegetable beds with military precision. Elena speaking to no one. Pamela painted a picture not of discipline, but of detachment. Not a homeowner, but a threat. She even used phrases like potential crisis risk and behavioral isolation. Words engineered to evoke fear, not facts. Someone asked, "Is she armed?" Pamela didn't answer. She didn't have to. And 7. The next morning, Nathan caught Pamela standing at the curb with a phone in her hand. She wasn't hiding. She wanted to be seen. Elena was mid-run, finishing a tight lap around their backyard. Her movements were exact, deliberate, quiet. Pamela angled her phone, carefully framing the moment like a threat in motion. Nathan stepped onto the porch, not saying a word. Pamela offered only a glance. Calm, smug, and then she walked back inside. 10 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up across the street. Unmarked, tinted windows. Stayed for 6 minutes, then left. Nathan didn't mention it to Elena. He didn't need to. That evening, she placed a single printed page on the table. It was a screenshot, an online article about wellness checks for veterans, including the criteria required to initiate one and the growing trend of false claims submitted by concerned citizens. At the bottom of the page, she had written in pencil, Phase 2 begins. And at 9:11 a.m. the next day, Pamela dialed 911. Her voice was controlled, measured, and practiced, like she was reading from a script. "I'd like to report a concerning situation," she began. "A veteran neighbor, female, early 40s, displays signs of combat behavior, erratic routines, frequent physical training, possible untreated PTSD, no known employment, reclusive, avoids community contact. There's worry she may be a danger to herself or others." She paused, then added the killer phrase, "Several families have expressed discomfort, especially with children nearby." The dispatcher asked standard questions. Pamela answered like she'd studied for them. When asked for her name, she gave it willingly. "I just want everyone to be safe." The dispatcher logged the report as a veteran welfare check. Tier 2 concern. That meant body cam activation, 2-officer minimum, and backup within a 1-mile radius. Pamela hung up the phone, exhaled, and smiled. She'd done her part. The system would take care of the rest. Nathan was making coffee when it happened. He heard the soft crunch of tires on gravel, the distant squawk of a police radio, the hollow thud of a car door closing, then another. 2 officers approached the front gate. One young, one older. Their posture calm, but alert. Elena was in the kitchen, chopping herbs. The garden scent clung to her sleeves. Nathan's heart rate spiked. He moved to intercept, but Elena raised a hand. "I'll answer," she said. "Stay back." She walked to the front door with a pace that could cut glass. When she opened it, there was no fear in her face. No anger either. Just calm. "Good morning, ma'am," the older officer said. His name tag read Sergeant Brooks. "We received a wellness report. May we speak with you for a moment?" Elena nodded once. "Of course." Nathan stood at the hallway's edge, frozen in place, watching as the door closed gently behind her. "How?" The conversation lasted 5 minutes. Through the window, Nathan saw Elena speak evenly, clearly. No wild gestures. No defensiveness. The younger officer, Riley, took notes. Sergeant Brooks mostly observed. At one point, Elena retrieved something from her wallet and handed it over. That's when Nathan saw it happen. The stillness. The recognition. Brooks stood a little straighter. His eyes flicked to the ID again. Then he slowly lifted his hand and gave Elena a crisp military salute. Nathan blinked. Elena returned it calm, exact, and the tension drained from the moment like air from a balloon. The officers thanked her and left without incident. But across the street, Pamela stood behind her blinds, watching in stunned disbelief. She had expected confrontation. What she got instead was respect. And that terrified her more. "Oh, Zad." Back inside, Elena placed the ID back in her wallet and said nothing. Nathan sat down slowly. "What did you show them?" he asked quietly. Her response was flat. "Proof." He waited, but she didn't elaborate. She just returned to her herbs, washed her hands, and resumed chopping, as if nothing had happened. But something had, because from that moment on, Pamela Wright was no longer playing offense. She had declared war on someone she thought was unarmed. And now, for the first time, she realized she had underestimated the wrong woman. Nathan had never heard the front yard go so quiet. The kind of quiet that bends time, where every second expands, every movement feels heavier than it should. Elena had just stepped back inside, calm as ever, after what should have been a confrontation, and ended as a silent exchange of respect. Nathan stood in the hallway, watching her. Still barefoot, still wiping her hands with a towel, still in control. "Saluted you," he said, voice low. Elena nodded once. "Sergeant Brooks, 2nd Battalion, Ramadi, 2006. Nathan blinked. "You knew him?" "Not personally, but I knew the unit." And he recognized the badge. Nathan hesitated, then carefully, "What badge?" Elena's gaze was steady. "Not yet." And just like that, the subject closed. She walked past him like a ghost. No drama, no explanation. Just the same unshakable grace that had followed her every step since the day they moved in. But Nathan knew one thing for sure now. Pamela Wright had tried to strike at something far larger than she could comprehend. And the hammer hadn't even fallen yet. In crumbing, across the street, Pamela was spiraling. She'd watched it all. The approach, the polite questioning, the handover of the ID, and then that salute. The salute broke her. It wasn't just the failure of her plan, it was the reversal. The power dynamics she thought she controlled, twisted in front of her eyes. Her narrative of a disturbed veteran needing oversight collapsed the second those officers treated Elena like the superior. She spent that afternoon making phone calls. HOA board members, city council assistants, even a retired JAG friend from a few states over. But nothing landed. No one was interested in removing someone from the neighborhood based on morning push-ups. No one but Pamela believed Elena was a threat anymore, which meant Pamela needed something bigger. She needed an angle, a crime, a weapon, anything that could reframe the narrative and reestablish control. And when she couldn't find one, she tried again to fabricate it. And 2 days later, Officer Riley returned. Not in a patrol car, but alone, in civilian clothes, wearing a jacket that looked too big on his frame. Nathan saw him from the window, walking up the path cautiously. Elena met him at the door. "I'm off duty," Riley said, holding up a small card. "But I wanted to give you this." It was a copy of his incident report standard procedure, but he'd flagged something unusual. Pamela's name had appeared in multiple wellness checks across the county in the past 5 years. All of them dismissed. All targeted at residents she labeled disruptive. "It's a pattern," he said, informally, of course. Elena scanned the paper. Her face didn't change. "Thank you." Riley hesitated. "That salute from Sergeant Brooks. I'd never seen him do that before." Elena looked up, a soft flicker behind her eyes. "People forget," she said, "that silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it means restraint." Riley nodded, almost respectfully. Then he left. And Nathan watched as Elena quietly slipped the report into her cabinet, into the growing file labeled Phase 3. The next morning, everything snapped. Pamela marched to their driveway with a clipboard and a printed complaint. Unauthorized fence height, unapproved vegetation type, non-native species, possible concealed surveillance equipment. She was flanked by 2 HOA loyalists, both visibly uncomfortable but unwilling to confront her. Nathan opened the door first, tired, unshaven, trying to keep the peace. "We're done with this," he said firmly, but without heat. Pamela shoved the paper forward. "You don't get to decide that. This is a matter of community standards." Then Elena stepped outside. No words, just presence. And that was enough. Pamela's voice faltered, then rose sharply again. "We've tried being polite, but your refusal to integrate is creating instability. The board will escalate if necessary." Nathan saw Elena tilt her head slightly, a movement so small it was almost imperceptible. Then, behind them, the sound of tires on gravel again. But this time, it wasn't a patrol car. It was the black and white supervisor unit. Windows tinted, badge emblazoned across the side. Orange County Sheriff, command response. It pulled up slow, deliberate, final. End of. The door opened, and Chief Thomas Callahan stepped out. He didn't wear a full uniform, just a pressed white shirt, khakis, and a belt heavy with age. His badge rested easily at his hip. His walk was steady, unhurried. Pamela's mouth opened, then stayed open, because when he reached the edge of the walkway and saw Elena standing beside Nathan, he smiled. "Hello, sweetheart," he said. The word dropped like a grenade in a still room. Pamela blinked, lips forming a question she hadn't prepared for. Chief Callahan continued, tone now professional. "We've reviewed the wellness check reports, body cam footage, complaint records, and community documentation provided by the Reeds." He held up a folder, thick, organized. "Frankly, it paints a troubling pattern of targeted harassment, improper use of emergency services, and personal bias under the guise of HOA policy. Pamela stammered. She refused to comply. She's isolated. She doesn't participate. Callahan raised a hand. You called law enforcement on a Medal of Honor recipient, Pamela. Silence. She didn't tell you? He added, glancing at Elena. That's just like her. Pamela looked like her skeleton was collapsing inward. Neighbors had begun to gather now, drawn by the marked vehicle, by the sheriff, by the word, medal. Callahan turned to Nathan and extended his hand. You've been patient. She's lucky to have you. Nathan shook it, still stunned. Elena didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence had become a force larger than anyone on the block could ignore, especially now when even the chief of police called her sweetheart. And Pamela Wright stepped back slowly, clipboard dangling at her side. For the first time in years, she looked genuinely small. The Queen of Willow Creek had misjudged her opponent, and now the court was watching. Pamela Wright didn't remember backing away. One moment she was standing firm, clipboard clenched like a shield. The next, her shoes were scraping the edge of her manicured lawn, and the sheriff of Orange County was facing her like a quiet verdict carved in flesh and bone. The name Medal of Honor echoed too loud in her ears to process anything else. Neighbors were watching now. Real ones. The ones she once commanded through suggestion and fear. They stood on their porches, behind trimmed hedges, phones in hand, unsure if they were capturing the end of a reign or the beginning of a reckoning. Sheriff Callahan didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His calm was heavier than most men's anger. Pamela, he said evenly, we have the reports, the body cam footage, the calls, the false citations, the private surveillance attempts, and now we have at least 4 witness statements describing a coordinated pattern of harassment toward the Reeds, especially Mrs. Reed. Pamela tried to lift her chin. They refused to join the HOA. Callahan's eyes narrowed a fraction. They didn't have to. Legally. Morally. Not even socially. And it's not a crime to prefer solitude, nor to grow tomatoes in non-HOA approved soil. The clipboard slipped from her hands, landing with a muted slap on her driveway. Elena's silence, he added, was grace, and your aggression, it was noise. For the first time, Nathan saw something break in Pamela's expression. Not just shock, not just fear, recognition. The sudden, irreversible understanding that everything she had built, her influence, her persona, her quiet empire of neighborhood fear, was crumbling in real time. Because power borrowed through rules becomes powerless when the rulebook is revoked. And Elena had never been playing her game. That afternoon, the official process began. A temporary restraining order was filed against Pamela Wright, pending review. HOA board members called an emergency meeting, distancing themselves with phrases like, "We had no idea." And Pamela acted on her own initiative. But the damage was done. Elena submitted a binder 3 inches thick to the sheriff's office. Nathan had seen her compile it over weeks, silently, page by page. Dates and timestamps of courtesy visits. Every unsolicited flyer. Drone footage of Pamela's surveillance attempts. Audio recordings of passive-aggressive confrontations. Screenshots of digital HOA newsletters referencing non-integrated properties. Attached at the end was a copy of the wellness report highlighted with every phrase that mischaracterized Elena's military background, her routines, and her mental health. It was the kind of file that didn't just prove harassment, it mapped it. And still, within 72 hours, Pamela was issued a cease and desist order by county legal counsel. Within a week, she was formally suspended from her role as HOA chair pending legal proceedings. Within a month, the district attorney filed charges under 2 statutes: false reporting to law enforcement, targeted harassment of a military veteran. The second charge made the case federal. A local paper ran the headline, "Neighborhood Tyrant Accused of Harassing Medal of Honor Recipient." It was accompanied by a photo. Elena standing at the edge of her porch, expression unreadable, the American flag billowing behind her in perfect alignment. Pamela's face wasn't in the photo, but her shadow was. Endos. Nathan watched it all unfold, not with triumph, but with a strange, quiet ache. There was no gloating from Elena. No public statement, no media interviews. She simply resumed her life. Morning workouts, garden tending, cooking quietly with Nathan in the kitchen. If anything, she seemed softer. Or maybe he was only now beginning to understand the weight she had been carrying all along. One evening, he found her in the backyard, sitting cross-legged by the raised beds. He sat beside her, careful not to speak first. After a while, she murmured, "She built a kingdom out of rules," and thought silence meant surrender. Nathan nodded slowly. "And you?" Elena looked up at the sky. "I didn't come here to fight. I came to grow things." He didn't press further. He didn't need to. The woman next to him had survived worse than neighborhood politics. She'd seen what happened when power was used without principle, and she'd chosen a different weapon: patience. Pamela never saw it coming because she mistook absence of noise for absence of resistance. That had been her fatal miscalculation. And by the time the court hearings began, Pamela had become a ghost in her own neighborhood. Former allies crossed the street to avoid her. HOA board members refused her calls. A public apology was drafted by her attorney but never read aloud. The closest she came was a mumbled statement during her arraignment: "I just wanted the community to feel safe." But safety built on lies collapses fast. Her sentence: 18 months probation, a $5,000 fine, 200 hours of community service at the local VA hospital, was lighter than expected. Some said she got off easy. Elena said nothing at all. But Nathan, watching from the back row of that courtroom, saw the true punishment wasn't legal. It was irrelevance. Pamela Wright had once controlled the tone of an entire street. Now she couldn't even control the silence. Everything. Weeks later, the HOA formally amended its charter, adding a clause that prohibited retaliation or coercion against non-member residents. The clause was unofficially referred to as the Reed provision. Elena didn't attend the vote. She was in the backyard, teaching a new neighbor how to propagate basil. Nathan watched them from the porch, sipping coffee. The woman who'd once been seen as a threat was now being trusted with tomatoes, tools, and tender advice. And she wasn't doing it for optics or power. She was doing it because that's who she was before someone tried to define her otherwise. The first time Nathan saw Pamela again was in aisle 9 of the local supermarket. He almost didn't recognize her. The blazer was gone. The bright lipstick, the aggressive posture, the ever-present clipboard, all stripped away. She stood in front of the cereal shelf, staring blankly at a box of bran flakes, fingers hovering like she'd forgotten what food was for. Their carts nearly collided. She looked up, startled, eyes tired, shoulders slouched. A pause stretched between them like a thin wire. Then, for the first time since the chaos began, Pamela Wright did something she'd never done before. She spoke without power. "Mr. Reed?" Her voice cracked on the edge of his name. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly." Nathan didn't reply right away. He just studied her. No clipboard, no guard, no command. Only a woman. Small in frame, smaller in presence. But, maybe, not entirely lost. "I believe you," he said at last. Pamela nodded once. "It wasn't much, but it was everything." Back home, Nathan told Elena. She didn't react, just placed a bowl of soup on the table and said, "People change when they have no choice." He waited, then asked, "Do you forgive her?" Elena stirred her spoon, thoughtfully. "Forgiveness isn't for her," she said. "It's for the soil, so something better can grow." Inzel. Over the following months, the Willow Creek Reserve neighborhood quietly evolved. Without Pamela in charge, the HOA took on a new tone: less enforcement, more community. A new board was elected, led by a retired teacher who believed in mediation over mandates. Flyers shifted from compliance to connection. They even invited Elena to speak at a quarterly town hall. She declined. Instead, she proposed a different initiative, a veteran welcome committee designed to help former service members integrate into suburban life without suspicion or pressure. The idea passed unanimously. Pamela wasn't at that meeting, but she was mentioned in a way that surprised everyone. A younger board member stood up and said, "We can't fix everything at once, but we can make sure no one in this neighborhood ever feels unwelcome just because they've lived a different kind of life." He didn't name names, But the message was clear. Ezero. At the VA hospital, Pamela served her hours quietly. No speeches, no performative remorse, just silence and effort. She helped set up wheelchairs, delivered medication trays, took lunch orders from men and women who had fought in places she couldn't even pronounce. At first, they didn't trust her. The nurses, the volunteers, even the veterans themselves kept a distance. But she didn't push, didn't explain, just kept showing up. There was one moment 8 weeks in when she was helping a double amputee Marine adjust his seat, and he asked, offhand, "You a vet?" She shook her head. Number just. Someone who misunderstood things. He looked at her long and hard, then simply said, "Good on you for being here." Pamela didn't cry in that moment, but she did. Later, in her car, alone. Because that single sentence meant more than she thought she deserved. 1 year later, the Willow Creek Reserve held its first Heroes in the community celebration. It wasn't flashy, just a barbecue in the park with a few folding chairs, some donated decorations, and a quiet honor ceremony. Nathan grilled hot dogs. Elena wore jeans and a plain white t-shirt. Her only accessory was the faint outline of a metal-shaped shadow beneath her collar. When her name was called, she stood up, accepted the plaque with a simple nod, and said one thing: "I never wanted recognition. I just wanted a place to plant something and not have it ripped out." Applause followed. Not loud, but genuine. Pamela was there too. In the back row. Not as a guest of honor, not as a speaker, just there, listening. After the ceremony, she walked up slowly. No crowd, no camera. Elena turned when she approached. Pamela extended her hand. "I'm still learning. But I wanted to thank you for how you handled all of it. With restraint, with dignity. You didn't just teach me what strength looks like. You taught this whole neighborhood." Elena looked at the hand, then shook it. "I didn't do it to teach anyone," she said. "I did it so the next veteran who moves here doesn't have to fight a different kind of war." Pamela nodded. That was all. They stood in silence for a moment. Two women who had once faced each other across a battlefield of lawn disputes and policy threats, now standing beneath the same string of paper flags, swaying gently in the spring breeze. And zitter. In the months that followed, Pamela became something different. Not a leader, not a pariah, just a neighbor. She planted vegetables in her own yard, something she once labeled non-compliant. She joined the new welcome committee, this time not to instruct, but to listen. She volunteered at the community food pantry. Quiet, unseen. Some people never forgave her. That was fair. But some did. Over time. And Elena? She never sought revenge. Never recounted the events like a victory. Never wore her medals in public. But she did keep one thing on display. A small wooden sign Nathan carved by hand. It read, "Silence is not surrender." And beneath it, in smaller font, "Strength roots deeper in peace than in power." And Nathan sometimes caught Elena standing by that sign at dusk, after her garden was watered and the streetlights flicked on one by one. She'd stand there in silence, hands behind her back, not looking at the past, but making peace with it, because the war had ended. And this time, everyone won something. True power doesn't come from control, it comes from service. The loudest voice may command obedience, but it's the quiet strength that inspires lasting respect. 1. Silence is not weakness, it's the discipline of those who know who they are. Elena didn't retaliate with anger or outrage. She responded with calm, legal clarity, and strategic restraint. It wasn't submission. It was strength held in stillness. 2. No one has the right to weaponize community as an excuse for personal control. Pamela believed she was enforcing standards. In reality, she was masking fear with authority. This story reminds us that laws without empathy become instruments of intimidation, not protection. 3. Service and sacrifice leave a deeper legacy than any title or position. What made officers salute Elena wasn't her medals, it was her integrity when no one was watching. True authority isn't demanded. It's earned by how we treat others when we hold power. 4. Those who build their influence through fear eventually fall alone. Pamela ruled with rules. But the moment truth came to light, so did her isolation. The most terrifying punishment isn't arrest, it's irrelevance. 5. Redemption begins not with words, but with quiet, consistent action. Pamela didn't earn forgiveness by saying sorry. She earned it by showing up, helping, and changing even when no one was watching. Redemption isn't about being seen. It's about becoming someone better than who you were. 6. A strong community isn't one that enforces sameness, it's one that protects dignity. The neighborhood didn't become better because Pamela was removed. It improved because people chose to speak up, to support one another, and to defend the right to live in peace without conformity. Final thought. Service doesn't require applause. Respect can't be coerced. And the most powerful thing we can do with authority is use it to lift others, not control them.